My pleasure to introduce today's panel on the long game in short-term rentals. Please welcome Eric Breon, CEO, Vacasa. Brad Handler, founder and chairman of the board, Inspirato. Clara Liang, vice president and general manager, professional host and luxury businesses, Airbnb. And Amiad Soto, CEO and co-founder of Guesty. Thank you all for being here today. I want to dig right into the title of this session, talk about the long game. There's so much going on in the short-term rental market, and to me, one of the strongest trends is that hosts are professionalizing at an extremely rapid pace. Phocuswright is seeing this clearly in our research. We recently fielded a survey to homeowners who rent out their properties, and 50% told us that they use a property manager. This is up from only 10% in 2015. So this is a huge shift, indicating that the rental by owner segment is under a lot of pressure to professionalize in order to compete. So my first question is, what will the short-term rental landscape look like in 5 years, particularly from the standpoint of rental by owner versus managed properties? And Clara, Airbnb has its roots with homeowners, of course, but your role is to bring on more professionally hosted inventory, so it'd be great to start with you.
So when I look at the landscape of what hosting is, there's the mechanics of actually supporting a guest to do the turnover, to get the property ready, to get it listed. And then there's the actual hospitality, which is the authenticity of the greeting and the preparation for that guest, and making sure that there's a really wonderful personalized experience. What I see over the next 5 years is applying technology to make the hard mechanical things easier so that you can be more reliable. You're spending less time managing the check-in and check-out details and much more time thinking about the personal hospitality so that travel is actually more delightful, more authentic, more personalized. So that's the transition that I see. And so we spend a lot of time working on tools to help, we call them hospitality entrepreneurs, hosts who want to be able to build a business supporting great guest experiences.
And to touch base on it, one of the reasons we started Guesty was being a host ourselves on Airbnb was too much work. And we realized that in order for it to scale, it needs to be something that can be automated or professionalized. And I am a big believer, first of all Guesty customers are professional hosts. And in a way, I believe that making this inventory more professional helps this industry grow better because people can rely on its consistency of quality.
Sure. And Eric, you have about over 23,000 managed properties at this point in your portfolio. You've raised over $500 million to build Vacasa. So what's the landscape look like to you in 5 years?
Yeah, so we very much see the professional as that's all we do. That's where we see things headed for some strange reason there. It does make a lot of sense, though, when you think about it. These are people who own a second home that they do not need because they wanted it. So the idea that they then need the part-time job, taking care of it on the weekends, finding that plumber at 10 p.m. on a Friday night, just doesn't make sense. So professional makes a ton of sense. We also see a big drive towards primary use of people's homes as being a vacation rental. When we started Vacasa 10 years ago, nobody bought a second home thinking, I'm going to rent it out. They bought the second home thinking they were going to use that. Then they realized they hadn't been there in 6 months. Then they talked to a property manager or started putting it on, VRBO or Airbnb or started sharing it with friends. But now from the start, people are buying specifically planning to rent it out, and I think that will continue. The drive towards professionalization as well as better asset quality, where people actually invest in the home.
Mm-hmm. Brad, you're a little different. You directly manage 300 properties exclusively in the luxury space. So you're a completely vertically integrated solution. So what's your take?
So thanks for the question. We've been at this for about 10 years, and we started at the very top end of the market. And as a result of that, we've always managed and controlled our inventory. So since we have exclusive dominion and control over everything about the homes that are part of our portfolio, the experience for our members has always been consistent because it's always been us. We take over those homes on average for about 5 years. And Inspirato acts as a subscription travel and entertainment company. And so as part of that, we're always controlling all aspects of both sides of the equation. We manage the source of all of our inventory and then control that inventory exclusively. And then because we are a subscription business with our members, everyone who uses the houses or uses all of the other experiences that we provide, we also know and have continuing relationships with. So those things combined, at least at our end of the market, lead me to believe that that's only going to become greater and greater as people gravitate towards some type of accommodation that's outside of a traditional hotel experience.
So let's talk about the consumer. Is this shift really driven by changing guest expectations, or is the novelty of staying with a local wearing off, or is it driven more by the industry's quest for standardization and scale, or is it really both?
Well,
anyone?
Maybe being the younger in the group here, I would say my part is it's definitely depends on the type of travel you're seeking. When I go to conferences like this one, I much rather stay in a hotel because it's more convenient. Where I go with my wife on vacation, I much rather stay at, if it's an urban market, I would rather stay in an Airbnb or a short-term let. And if it's a vacation market, maybe a villa, a cottage that has a resort type of feeling. So it really depends. I feel like there is no longer hospitality as a binary black and white where it used to be just hotels. Now there's a vast majority of different types of experiences. On Guesty, for example, we just had glamping, glamorous camping, and we just had tree houses and castles and many, many different types of inventory, and that opens up a lot of different types of experiences, and I feel the new type of traveler is expecting those experiences and not just expecting, a place to stay.
Mm-hmm. Our experience is that most people aren't looking to live like a local. They're there to vacation, and I think that's important to have housing that's more oriented with that as well. So my family and I were going to Mexico next week for Thanksgiving, and we're staying in a house in a community. And last time I was there was the big condo area where all the other apartments were, and I was like, I'm sure glad we're not staying there. That's horrible. It's ugly. They're not actually in the community. But then I thought about if all those people that were staying in those big, hideous condo buildings actually stayed in the different little communities, it would completely defeat what makes those communities great. So I do think it's great to have that option for those that are specifically looking to be in the community. But at the same time, vacation travelers, they value different amenities, like bigger pool complexes, all those other things that really are about what they're there for.
Mm-hmm. When I think about your question, it really comes down to the guests that we're serving. And I think it's important to understand that their taste is evolving, right? And we talk about travel, but I think you actually have to consider that how people are working, living, and traveling is all changing, and their expectations for the flexibility and the authenticity of that experience are evolving. So rather than sit and say, we've decided for you what you want for a particular trip, making sure that anyone can find a perfect place to stay for any trip, whether it's the hotel for the business trip, whether it is the great villa that you want with your family, whether it is to actually stay with someone who lives there because you're in town to run a marathon and you want to stay with another runner in town, actually giving you that flexibility allows people to find the perfect trip anytime. And I think we always have to keep what our guests want. That bar is always raising, and you have to skate where the puck is.
Mm-hmm. Let's talk about the crossover with hotels a bit. What does Marriott's entry into the space mean? Is it just an incremental loyalty play? Is it critical to strategy? Will more hotels follow them? Will Accor and Hyatt try again? Anyone?
So I think that it is a reaction to what large hospitality companies are seeing in the marketplace. They see that their customers want different choices when they're vacationing because they have different needs. As Ami said, it could be that you're here for a conference or it could be that you're on vacation. So the breadth of experiences that somebody wants means that you have to offer more choices. And a traditional hospitality company may have a portfolio of brands, but doesn't necessarily have a portfolio of experiences. And so as they try to experiment, I think one of the fundamental aspects that they'll run into is, even in their brand portfolios, they don't have vertical integration of everything that a customer sees, because they don't own the hotel. They don't own the houses, in Marriott's example. They're just trying to put something on top of it to make it appear like you're getting the same type of experience. That may work in certain demographics. What we have found consistently is at our demographic for Inspirato, that won't work. The only thing that will work is having actual vertical integration and control up and down the stack, because when something goes wrong, you need to make sure that it gets fixed instantly, and the only way that you can learn and iterate and get better is by controlling all the aspects of the experience for your members.
Mm-hmm. And by the way, on the Guesty software, we're already seeing a lot of our customers adding more hotel-like inventory, and it's starting to be supported by channels like Airbnb with their new multi-unit inventory aspect of things. And I think it's beneficial because, for one, it helps these businesses grow faster by centralizing operations, and two, it's providing a different type of stay for other people who are trying to get the benefits of both worlds. And I think the majority of the big players who are trying to grow faster will add more and more of these hybrid type of scenarios or hybrid type of properties. And if Marriott and the big guys want to take part of this, I think it's beneficial to the industry as well. At the moment, I am aware of only their subscription or their preferred travelers play, but I think in the long term, a lot of them would start taking more and more inventory of themselves as well.
Okay. Staying on the theme of hotels, Booking.com recently introduced standard star ratings for rentals similar to the system used for hotels for decades. Was this a much-needed move so consumers can compare and filter hotels and rentals more equally, and should the rest of the industry follow? Clara, can you comment on this?
So I can't comment a ton on what Booking is doing or the details of what they're rolling out. What I think is important is to make sure that there are signals and trustworthy signals for guests to be able to evaluate what is the right fit for them. We have over 7 million homes on the platform. Having a computer arbitrarily assign a rating to them only gets you so far. What a guest is looking for, how well that host has represented themselves, and the reality of that experience and making sure it lives up to what the guest was expecting, I think that's important. For us, more than 70% of our trips are actually reviewed by the guests who stayed on the trip. And so that signal to us and those millions and millions of reviews is the creation of, I think, that trust center. That's how we think about reputation.
Yeah, I think it's something that's very needed for the space. I don't think Booking's figured it out yet. I think if you look at their single-family inventory, a lot of them just simply make no sense, the ratings that they've been given. At the same time, I think it's hugely important for the industry. I think when people are shopping, they're shopping for different things. Like when you think about Yelp, you might see a 5-star review, but if it's for a $1 sign restaurant, it might not be where you want to go for dinner tonight. And we did the same for this space. People have different expectations, and how do you find what they're actually looking for and filter through? Because there's so much inventory out there, especially in the major markets.
Mm-hmm. I definitely think that signaling is an important issue that Clara brought up. In our own model for Inspirato members, we do have a feedback method for members to give comments about the places that they've been to. And what I find in reading those versus what I find in reading them on generic open source platforms is you get much greater detail when you have a way of linking back to who actually stayed there, and making sure that there's to use your word, an authentic voice that's speaking, I think gives a lot of clarity to any type of review, whatever that is.
And I think if you think about hotel star rating, it's also bound for disruption. Not all 4 listers are created equal. Not all 5 stars are created equal. And I think that what separates hotel 5 stars is their brand. And what's going to separate the professional property management companies with their star rating is going to be the brands as well. So brands like Vacasa, brands like Domio, Altido, Sonder, all these brands that are created in this industry are going to be the reason people choose their properties to stay in, not necessarily the star rating, because stars means a lot of different things to different people.
Yeah, let's talk about them a little bit more. So purpose-built rentals like Sonder, Domio, Stay Alfred, and Lyric, which Airbnb is invested in. These companies are raising a ton of money to build managed properties that are much more like hotels than typical rentals, compete in both spaces. So how are they going to affect the market in the coming years?
Well, we're really excited to see more and more companies actually be able to build businesses around providing hospitality to guests. the way I think about it is it's a flywheel. More incredible places to stay means more choices for guests, which means better stays, which ultimately drives more business to these companies. So we're really excited to support all of our partners in their growth and also continue to build the tools that allow anyone, if my husband and I want to buy a bed and breakfast and become hoteliers, in the next phase of our life, that there's actually tools and channels that help us do that. And I think it's really exciting to see the growth of the industry that way.
And piggybacking on that answer, I think technology is the key player in this, because technology will allow these brands or these new hospitality brands to focus on what matters most, is the human interaction of guests and hosts, and less of the operational hazards of running these hospitality industry. And I think more and more technology will be released by companies like Guesty and others, would allow this industry to move further towards much more human interaction.
Yes, I'd say the multifamily players like Sandra, they're filling a much needed need. I have young children, so if I'm staying in a city, we need 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, and the traditional Airbnb, not to pick on them too much, but there can't be randomness in the drawer next to the bed in the kid's bedroom that they could get into at night. Like, we need hospitality standard inventory, not just somebody's second home. So I think it's an important gap, but I do think the scale of that market is probably overstated. There's definitely the use cases where it makes sense, but the whole idea that somehow a vacation rental company can manage a 900 square foot 2-bedroom apartment for the price that a hotel can manage 400 square feet, despite not having on-premises laundry, despite not having all the centralization and services. I don't think the numbers work out long-term as well as some people think they do. I think it makes sense for the niche that actually needs that product. I don't see it as a threat to the overall hotel inventory as many people see.
Yeah. And I think the other thing you'll see from companies that are trying to do what a Sonder does, for example, is they're going to have a much tighter relationship with their customers than they currently have, because they are doing what we do at Inspirato, which is take on the risk of actually managing and controlling those assets, and that has a financial burden to it. So if you can't then fill those homes, you have a problem. And just relying on a marketplace to solve that problem in the long term is probably not going to be the most optimal way to do that.
Mm-hmm. I want to move on to some recent news. Airbnb recently announced they're verifying all listings on the platform, following the very sad news about the shooting on Halloween and the story about how fake hosts are able to scam guests by switching units at the last minute. Clara, I know this isn't your job responsibility, but a lot of people are wondering, how does a platform do this at scale, and is that effort sustainable? Can you comment on this?
Yeah, and just to set the record straight, I do think it's part of my responsibility. All of our employees actually take this incredibly seriously. Trust is actually the core currency. When you hear Brian, Joe, and Nate tell the founding story of Airbnb and when they were trying to raise, people thought they were crazy. You would never stay in a stranger's home. And ultimately, it's their innovation on trust that has allowed us to grow to this way. So the events of the last couple of weeks have really hit us hard. Orinda's not that far from home in San Francisco for many of us. And so what we've announced is that we want to take yet another major step forward to making sure that we are the most trusted travel community on the planet. We have hundreds of millions of guests. We have every 6 seconds, guests are checking into another Airbnb. And so at the scale, we know that you can't protect against everything. Life just happens at that scale. But we can certainly do as much as we can to make sure that our guests and our hosts have a really great experience. So yes, verifying 7 million listings and growing is no small task. We're still working out exactly the details of what that means, but it's making sure that our hosts and the listings are represented well. It's exactly what you can expect when you get there, and that your experience was a good one. And frankly, that our guests are good actors as well, who are people that would treat properties with respect and be good guests that contribute back to the community. And I think on top of that, it's being much more responsive to local communities. So if neighbors have a concern, we've had a neighbor hotline, but staffing it 24/7, making it much easier to find, so that if there's actually a problem, you can get a hold of us, and making sure that really great stays are happening in communities. Everyone who is touched by the Airbnb community should feel like it's a safe and wonderful experience. So that's part of our commitment over the next couple months here.
Any other thoughts?
I think one of the important things for companies like Airbnb and other marketplaces to do, in addition to trying to do this verification, is to make sure that the properties that they have actually comply with whatever the local ordinances are, and not leave that to the host, who is going to want to say, oh, we do comply, simply because they want to have the income. So I would suggest that for companies that are interested in that, to then look at making sure they comply with local zoning laws, they pay their TOT taxes, they do all the things that you need to do to actually be part of that community. And I think that would be a great step forward.
And that's the reason we started this whole thing, is professionals, right? To bring it back to the first question, these things, working with professionals, get you verification quite easily, right? Because you know that these are the standards that they need in order to stay alive as a business. And I feel a lot more of the inventory will be moving towards professionalism, because getting verified, getting the certain level of quality will be another work that they need to do. And if they choose a specific technology player or not, it would be needed to become more professionalized.
Mm-hmm. Just about out of time already. Any other thoughts on that?
Maybe I would just echo Brad's point. I think it is really important that companies are good for communities. They're good for humanity. I think making really big, bold commitments, working proactively with cities to understand what is happening. We have over 500 tax agreements where we are actually, on behalf of our hosts, helping them make sure their taxes get paid. That's just the start. And I think that it's incumbent on companies more and more that we are not just good for society, but really thinking about that in the details of all that we're working on. So I would echo that point.
All right. Please join me in thanking our panel, Ami, Clara, Brad.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Eric, sorry.